Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, September 25th, 2020. Want less tax evasion? Enact the FAIRtax. Jade Walle is a CPA and a partner in a Big Four accounting firm. Jade is also an AFFT board member, and he's written a paper that demonstrates clearly why there will be a significant reduction of evasion under the FAIRtax compared to the present income payroll tax system. This is the executive summary, quoting now. The FAIRtax will significantly reduce U.S. income tax evasion by 95% relative to the current gross tax gap. In 2019, the $780 billion gross tax gap would have been reduced to $41 billion under the FAIRtax. For 2020, the estimated $827 billion gross tax gap will be reduced to $43 billion, and by 2026, the estimated $1.2 trillion gross tax gap will be reduced to just $55 billion under the FAIRtax. This analysis summarizes the primary aspects of the current U.S. income and payroll tax system relative to the FAIRtax that creates a fertile environment for income tax evasion that the country is currently experiencing. Next, the gross tax gap under our current U.S. income payroll tax system is compared to an estimated tax gap that would persist if the FAIRtax were the primary mechanism by which the U.S. funded its treasury coffers, as opposed to the current income payroll tax system. Continuing quoting, the FAIRtax offers multiple aesthetically pleasing aspects of a tax collection system which contrast greatly with the current U.S. income payroll tax system. David R. Burton's January 2020 article, The FAIRtax Will Materially Reduce Tax Evasion, commonly called the Burton Study, highlights that lower marginal tax rates, fewer collection points, increased likelihood of evasion being discovered, reduced complexity, increasing the clarity of penalties, sales tax gaps being lower, and an increase in perceived fairness are all aspects of the FAIRtax that make it much more efficient with significantly less tax evasion expected relative to our current income payroll tax system. Several of the aforementioned traits of the FAIRtax system may individually be difficult to quantify as it relates to a measurable reduction in tax evasion relative to the current income payroll tax system. However, using available data, including the current gross tax gap outlined above, as well as existing consumption tax system empirical evasion analyses and studies, we can reasonably infer, extrapolate, and calculate the effect on gross tax evasion upon adoption of the FAIRtax, while simultaneously eliminating the IRS, all income taxes, and the payroll tax. End of quote. Now, there's a link to the rest of the paper in the printed version of the Chairman's Report published at fairtax.org. In conclusion, Mr. Walle's excellent paper is another tool that FAIRtax supporters can use to dispute any claim made by the ruling class and their swamp minions that enacting the FAIRtax would lead to more evasion than we have with the income tax. Now remember, for them, the income payroll tax system is a lucrative source of both self-enrichment and power. They're not going to give it up easily, and they'll say anything, no matter how ludicrous, to thwart our efforts to replace it with the FAIRtax. After setting forth the true facts, Mr. Walle concludes, quoting again, overall, an extremely conservative approximation of the decrease in the gross tax gap that the FAIRtax would yield is an annual 95% illegal tax evasion reduction. That's in the form of a lower gross tax cap, which in 2020 approximates $784 billion per year, with an expected increase to $1.1 trillion reduction in gross tax gap by the year 2026, end of quote. Now, there's an old protest from someone trying to proclaim his innocence after he was caught doing wrong. Well, who are you going to believe? Your lying eyes or me? There's also an old lawyer joke. How do you know when a lawyer is lying? When his lips are moving. Now, the same could be said for the ruling class and their swamp minions. If their lips are moving, there's a really good chance they're lying. So, on the subject of tax evasion, who are we going to believe? Mr. Walle and others like him giving us actual data, or the ruling class trying to protect their own interests? Now that should be a no-brainer. Now, if you have friends who don't know about the FAIRtax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under How It Works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the FAIRtax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.